As the first light of dawn breaks over the horizon, a ghostly armada appears. The Greek fleet, hundreds of ships strong, slices through the mist. On board, warriors grip their weapons, their faces set with determination. The beach erupts into chaos as the Greeks make their first attack. Leading them is Achilles, the mightiest of all warriors, charging with unmatched fury. The siege of Troy has begun and there's no turning back. The Greeks have come to take what they believe is rightfully theirs. This is the story of a love that sparked the greatest war of the ancient world. A love between Paris, the Trojan prince, and Helen, the most beautiful woman on earth. In 750 BC, a blind poet named Homer created two of the most legendary works in Western history, the Iliad and the Odyssey. In these epic poems, he narrated events that happened 500 years before his time. The story revolves around a wealthy and powerful kingdom called Troy, located across the sea from the great cities of Athens and Sparta. Troy was renowned for its supposedly indestructible walls, said to have been built by the gods themselves. The city was ruled by King Priam and Queen Hecuba. During his reign, Priam fathered 50 sons and 50 daughters. His eldest son, Prince Hector, was the most admired of all and Troy's greatest warrior. Hector was brave and honorable, second only to Achilles in combat. Then there was Paris, Hector's brother. Before Paris was born, Hecuba received a prophecy revealing that her unborn son was destined to bring destruction to Troy. Unable to kill the child herself, she instructed a local shepherd to do so. However, the shepherd, like Hecuba, couldn't harm the helpless infant, and instead raised Paris in secret, a decision that would ultimately change the course of history. Across the seas in the city of Sparta, Zeus, the king of the gods, fell in love with Queen Leda. Transforming himself into a magnificent swan, Zeus lay with the queen, who soon gave birth to 2 sons and 2 daughters, one of whom was Helen. Helen grew up to become the most beautiful woman in the world. When Helen grew up, nearly every man sought to win her hand in marriage. The greatest warriors, richest kings and princes of Greece traveled great distances to Sparta. Among them were Odysseus of Ithaca, Agamemnon of Mycenae, and Ajax of Salamis. To prevent bloodshed after Helen's decision, Odysseus proposed that each suitor swear an oath to protect Helen's chosen husband. With the threat of violence now averted, Helen chose Prince Menelaus of Mycenae. The two soon married, becoming the king and queen of Sparta. Little did the other suitors know that the oath they swore to prevent violence would ultimately draw them into one of the greatest wars the world had ever seen. Meanwhile, on Mount Olympus, another marriage was being celebrated. The marriage of Thetia, the goddess of water, and Peleus, king of Phthia. All the gods and heroes from across the land were invited, except for Eris, the goddess of discord and strife. Despite not being invited, Eris attended the wedding and brought with her a gift that would sow seeds of conflict among the gods, a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the most beautiful." Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite immediately began arguing over who should receive the apple. Unable to resolve the dispute, they turned to Zeus for a decision. Zeus, unwilling to favor any of the goddesses, decided to delegate the responsibility to a mortal. He chose a humble shepherd known for his fair judgment, a man who was none other than Prince Paris of Troy, raised as a shepherd during his exile. And so the 3 goddesses approached Paris, each offering him a different gift in exchange for his vote. Aphrodite, understanding Paris's desires, promised to grant him the most beautiful woman in the world, a proposition he couldn't resist. Paris handed the golden apple to Aphrodite, who then instructed him to travel to Sparta. There, she vowed to use her enchanting powers to make Queen Helen, whose unparalleled beauty was renowned, fall deeply in love with him. Upon arriving at Menelaus's grand palace in Sparta, Paris stepped into the opulent hall and was immediately captivated by its splendor. His gaze swiftly found Helen standing at the center of the room. Helen approached him with grace, her movements deliberate, and greeted him warmly.
"Welcome to Sparta, Prince Paris,"
Helen said, her eyes locked onto his. Her words ignited a flame in Paris's heart. As Helen was formally introduced to Paris, their eyes met, and in that instant, an arrow from Eros pierced Helen's heart, kindling a love that was undeniable. As night fell, Paris approached his brother Hector with urgency.
"Brother, I need your help. Do you love me?"
Paris asked earnestly. Hector, remembering past deeds, replied cautiously,
Last time you asked that, you stole a horse. What is it now?
This is different.
Paris insisted.
I love Helen and she loves me. We must leave Sparta tonight, together.
Understanding the gravity of the situation and sensing Paris's sincerity, Hector agreed to assist. He quickly devised a plan. A small group of loyal Trojan soldiers would create a diversion at the main gate. Meanwhile, Hector arranged for Paris and Helen to slip away through a hidden passage leading to the outskirts of the city. Riding towards the coast of Troy, Paris and Helen felt a rush of excitement mixed with apprehension. They were keenly aware that their escape would ignite a legendary conflict, yet in that fleeting moment, their hearts were set on each other and the hope of a shared future. Upon arriving in Troy, Paris was warmly recognized by his father, King Priam, who welcomed him with open arms. Furious upon discovering his wife's abduction, Menelaus raised his armies to attack the Trojans, calling upon all of Helen's former suitors to honor their oaths and join him in the conflict. True to their word, the greatest warriors from across Greece assembled to bring Helen back to Sparta. The first to pledge support to Menelaus was his brother, Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece and ruler over Mycenae. Following Agamemnon's example, the kings Odysseus, Nestor, and Diomedes, they were joined by the finest warriors Greece had to offer, including Achilles, Patroclus, Ajax the Greater, and Ajax the Lesser, all answering the call to arms. Achilles stood out as the greatest warrior in history, known for his invulnerability in battle, except for his heel, which was his sole weak spot. As the mighty fleet of hundreds of ships commanded by Agamemnon set sail, the Greeks encountered their first obstacle. The winds of the ocean suddenly calmed, leaving them stranded. To appease Artemis, the goddess of the wind, Agamemnon made the heart-wrenching decision to sacrifice his eldest daughter, Iphigenia. Satisfied by the sacrifice, Artemis released her grip on the winds, allowing the Greeks to continue their journey towards Troy. Awaiting them was the formidable army of Troy, bolstered by reinforcements from the Lycians and the Amazons, who stood united with King Priam to defend their homeland. The Amazons, renowned for their ferocity, were skilled warrior women who were unmatched in battle, surpassing most men in combat prowess. For 9 grueling years, the Greeks relentlessly attacked Troy, launching wave after wave of assaults that failed to breach the city's impenetrable walls. As the years passed and resources dwindled, Achilles led the Greek army south in search of supplies, gold, and women. They pillaged towns along the way, returning with many women as slaves, among them Briseis and Chryseis, 2 women whose fates would alter the course of the war. Briseis was awarded to Achilles, while Chryseis was given to Agamemnon. Agamemnon fell deeply in love with Chryseis, but her father, a priest of Apollo, was outraged to see his daughter enslaved. Despite offers of ransom, Agamemnon refused to release her, provoking Apollo to send a deadly plague upon the Greek army. Eventually, Agamemnon relented and let Chryseis go. Driven by desire and anger, Agamemnon took Briseis from Achilles, sparking rage in the great warrior. Achilles drew his sword in fury but was restrained by the goddess Athena to prevent further violence. Refusing to serve under a king who had dishonored him, Achilles withdrew from the Greek armies. For a while, the Greeks managed to continue the fight without Achilles, though losses on both sides began to mount. In an effort to end the war without further bloodshed, Paris and Menelaus agreed to settle their dispute with a duel. As swords clashed and warriors on both sides watched anxiously, Menelaus emerged as the clear victor, striking Paris down until he lay on the ground. Just as Menelaus prepared to deliver the final blow, Aphrodite, who favored Paris, intervened and swiftly whisked Paris away to his chamber, where Helen awaited his return. Relieved to be alive, Paris clung to Helen's robes, grateful to be reunited with her once more. However, as Helen had witnessed the duel from her window, she was not moved by Paris's performance. The humiliation Paris had endured was so profound that Helen's love for him began to diminish. Realizing the war would persist, Hector rallied his troops for an aggressive attack that pushed the Greeks all the way back to their ships. Without Achilles, the Greeks were no match for Hector. Taking initiative, Achilles' closest friend Patroclus donned Achilles' distinctive armor and charged into battle. Intending to protect his men, Hector confronted Patroclus, believing him to be Achilles. With sword in hand, Hector delivered a swift and fatal blow, striking Patroclus down. The Trojan prince was shocked by how easily Greece's greatest warrior had fallen. But upon removing Achilles' helmet, Hector realized that he had not slain Achilles after all. Seeing his best friend lying dead before him, Achilles was overwhelmed with grief, which quickly turned into an insatiable thirst for revenge against Hector and Troy. Achilles charged towards Hector, who, upon seeing the real Achilles, began to flee in fear. Hector ran 3 times around the walls of Troy with Achilles in pursuit until he was finally caught. Exhausted and unable to run further, Hector decided to make a final stand. He charged at Achilles, drawing his sword, but his final swing missed and he fell to the ground. In his last moments, Hector refused to beg for his life, asking only that Achilles treat his body with respect so his family could mourn his passing properly. Ignoring his plea, Achilles ended Hector's life by plunging his spear into his neck, then tied Hector's legs to the back of his chariot and dragged his lifeless body around the city, a brutal display witnessed by Hector's grieving family from the city walls. King Priam, unable to bear the sight, approached Achilles in his camp under the cover of night, begging for his son's body to be returned. Moved by Priam's heartfelt plea, which resonated with his own grief for Patroclus, Achilles relented and allowed Priam to take Hector's body back to Troy. With Hector's death, Homer concluded the epic tale of the Iliad, but the tragic story of Troy was far from over. Later writers, especially Virgil, would continue to tell the saga of Troy, weaving more sorrowful events into its enduring narrative. The next day, so the story continues, Achilles pressed on towards Troy, mercilessly slaughtering Trojans as he advanced towards the city gates. Paris shot Achilles with a poisoned arrow into his heel, targeting the only mortal part of his body. Achilles succumbed to his wounds that day. Paris's triumph was short-lived, as the Greeks, witnessing Achilles' demise, swiftly sought revenge, hunted down Paris and killed him. With their greatest heroes fallen, both sides descended into despair, particularly the Greeks, who now saw no way to breach Troy's formidable walls without the indomitable strength of Achilles. There was one Greek, though, who refused to give up. Odysseus devised a brilliant plan that would echo through the ages. He constructed a colossal wooden horse, hollowing out its interior to conceal himself and Greece's finest warriors. At dawn the following day, the Trojans awoke to find the colossal wooden horse outside their walls. Believing it to be a peace offering and seeing the Greek camp abandoned, jubilation swept through the city. Convinced that they had achieved victory, the Trojans joyously brought the horse within their fortified walls and celebrated what they believed to be the end of the war. That night, while the city slept, Odysseus, Menelaus, Diomedes, and Ajax emerged from the horse's belly. They silently opened Troy's gates and signaled with fire for the Greek fleet to return. The Trojans would awake to their city ablaze with Greek warriors flooding through the streets, looting homes and slaughtering any remaining defenders. In the chaos, Priam, the king of Troy, met his end when Achilles' son, Pyrrhus, plunged a dagger into his defenseless body amidst the burning city. Pyrrhus then went to the royal chambers where he found Hector's wife, Andromache, and their son. In a brutal act of vengeance, Pyrrhus snatched the infant from Andromache's arms and threw him from the city walls to his death. He then took Andromache as his concubine, subjecting her to a life of servitude. After 10 years of war, Troy's famous walls had finally been breached, its king slain, and its great heroes defeated. Now Troy lay at the mercy of the Greeks, facing the grim reality of their devastating conquest. The story ends as dramatic as it began. Upon Agamemnon's return to Sparta, he was murdered by his own wife, Clytemnestra, who sought revenge for the sacrifice of their daughter, Iphigenia. Helen, returned to Sparta, faced Menelaus's wrath for her role in the Trojan War. However, unable to bring himself to harm Helen, Menelaus chose to forgive her. The two would rule as king and queen once again. A small group of Trojan survivors crossed the Mediterranean and landed on the shores of Italy. Among them, Romulus and Remus would emerge, founding the city of Rome and shaping its destiny. Meanwhile, for Odysseus, a long and perilous journey awaited. Over the course of 10 years, he would face terrifying creatures and daunting challenges on his journey homeward as the epic tale of the Odyssey began.